The following is a fan-made review. All clips of Space Ghost are owned by Cartoon Network. All other clips and music are owned by their respective owners. We encourage our viewers to support the official content.
Legacy. We'll all leave one behind as we live our lives, and we hope that others will remember and honor that legacy. Now, a legacy can be anything, really. A saying you often told to others, a review show you might be working on with your friend, or maybe your legacy is a show you cranked out in a week, and somebody else took that show, reused it, and made something even better out of it so that nobody even remembers the original. You know, for example. Hello everyone, I'm your host, Coronet Chris, and welcome to Review This on my new set, where we're going to be talking about animation and storytelling in its many forms. Today, my friends, we're going to be talking about Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Let's get it started. Today we're going to be talking about Space Ghost. We're going to cover the history and its impact on a lot of the shows you'd see on Adult Swim and Cartoon Network today. Everything has a start, and Space Ghost is no exception. Let's talk about the beginnings of...
What in the Sam hell is going on here?
Crap, I thought I disconnected that piece. Well, everyone, let's welcome our guest, Space Ghost.
Who the hell are you, and what are you doing on my set?
I'm Coronet Chris, and we're on review.
Oh, you're a nobody and a weirdo. Now I want you off my set.
I don't have to take that from a hobo in a cape. Look, this is my set now, mostly because nobody cared enough to stop me.
And how did you even get here? We're in space.
It was free real estate. At the beginning of cartoons...
Are you ignoring me?
Fine, look, if you're just gonna keep sitting there and staring at me, why don't you have the review? It'll make things go a lot quicker.
Splendid.
Why don't you start?
At the beginning of Cartoon Network's history as a channel, Ted Turner, owner of Turner Broadcasting, purchased the cartoon libraries of MGM, Fletcher Studios, and Hanna-Barbera, which were large enough to keep a channel of reruns going for quite a while. Though eventually, original content had to be made, so Mike Lazo, who would be the first programmer for the network, with no budget at the time, decided to use the library of more forgettable Hanna-Barbera characters. Those characters being Zorak, Moltar, and yours truly, Space Ghost.
The original Space Ghost cartoon was essentially an unimpressive superhero show that came out in the mid-60s. And when I say unimpressive, I mean even the character designer behind Space Ghost, Alex Toth, hated him. So Space Ghost didn't have much staying power on his own. And while I'm sure there are old school fans, they were kind of overtaken by the new fans when Space Ghost went coast to coast. The premise of Coast to Coast was to take 3 characters from Space Ghost, and then take the animations that were already made for the original show, and dub over them with newer, funnier lines, thus turning it into a late-night talk show. A simple premise, but with incredible results.
Well, I agree that my show was amazing. That Alex Koff has no idea what he was talking about. I mean, I was an amazing superhero.
It's Toth, and he's the one who created you, so he would have an idea.
No one created me. I was formed from the universe. In the darkest corner of space in a 2-dimensional universe, it was there.
Okay, before we get too meta, let's move on. So by the time the first season of Coast to Coast wrapped up, it had already garnered attention from a large audience. And it really hit its stride by the time the 3rd season rolled around.
Once the show had gained enough popularity, it essentially became the flagship show for Cartoon Network, leading into more original programming being produced. It's almost like if it wasn't for me and my show, that scam of a channel wouldn't exist.
Ego stroking aside, he does have a point. Eventually, Space Ghost would go on to host a showcase of products from Turner's in-house animation studio, one of those products being the Powerpuff Girls. Later on, Cartoon Planet, a cartoon variety show, was created with its hosts being Space Ghost, Zorak, and another reused character, Brak.
As the series continued into production, other series began to appear, either very much inspired by the show or even trying to imitate its style. Some shows were The Brak Show, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, and C-Lab 2021, which took heavy influence from the show. There's actually a modern show which also took inspiration from old Space Ghost, The Eric Andre Show. Yes, Eric Andre has expressed how Coast to Coast in part was a big inspiration for his show.
That's actually very surprising. And what's even more surprising is that thanks to Space Ghost, we got one of the biggest anime influencers here in the States. More specifically, it's thanks to Moltar. Ain't that right, Moltar?
Wait, what? Moltar, you're here?
Yeah?
Well, why haven't you said anything or stopped this loser from getting on set?
I don't know. He just walked on set and I want to see how it played out.
Sounds about right. Well, get on with it.
Right. Well, during 1997 to 1999, I sent out a satellite called Cyber 49. It recorded a lot of action out there in the universe, sent it back to Ghost Planet, and then beamed it out for all people to see. I called this stream of shows Toonami, and eventually, after I left, this cool robot by the name of Tom took over the broadcasting, and it ended up showing a lot of what the kids call anime. Last I heard, the block was back and still shows a lot of the newest stuff out there.
Yeah, so essentially, if it wasn't for Space Ghost and Moltar, we wouldn't have one of the biggest anime hosting blocks in the States. And with that, I think it's time we address the animated elephant in the room. Namely, that Review This was created to view animation as a storytelling medium, and both the original Space Ghost and Coast to Coast is kind of lacking in that regard. So why look at the show if it's lacking a lot of the basics for my show?
Yeah, why is that?
You be quiet for this. The reason I looked at Space Ghost is twofold. I wanted to take a look at a show whose foundation was built on not its own original animation, but on the back of a similar, yet ultimately different show. Now, this isn't to say animation has never been reused before this point, because people are noticing now more than ever that Disney, for a long time, reused whole animation cells for their movies. However, this isn't just a movie. It's an entire series with multiple seasons, made in this style and having as big an impact as it did. Which brings us to my original thought, a legacy. Space Ghost has had a large legacy. Its impact as a show is still felt today, from shows that either spun off from it or were heavily inspired by it. Like we've discussed before, for the longest time Space Ghost was the poster boy for Cartoon Network as a channel, and Cartoon Network has become one of the big three cartoon and animation networks currently running. So to ignore Space Ghost is to ignore the channel's beginnings and all that followed. Well, I think that's about it for this episode of Review This, and thank you all for watching and supporting, and I hope to see you all next time. See, Space Ghost, it wasn't that bad.
What can I say, kid? You're not so bad. We should probably get going. I did set up a self-destruct sequence.
Son of a bitch!
Haha, that sucker. I wonder where Zorak is. Oh yeah, his mistress.